You're listening to The Political Dive. Hello, Road Raiders. I'm Mateo, the Opinions Section Editor here at the Daily Toreador, and today I'm joined by...
Caleb Morris, Director of Diversity for our Student Government Association.
And I'm Hunter Heck, the President of the Student Government Association.
Perfect. And today we're going to be talking about Hunter's response to the previous podcast that we posted, and then also about diversity, equity, and inclusion within SGA. Okay, so Hunter, would you like to respond to the podcast and what we said?
Yes, absolutely. So, first of all, I just really appreciate y'all taking the time to discuss the issues mentioned in the podcast, because I think what it really did highlight for me and my executive team was that transparency can definitely be improved within Student Government Association, and that we can continue to improve the way we communicate what we're doing and how we're going about things. And so hopefully today we can, even in doing this podcast and in providing updates about other updates we're doing for transparency, we can help communicate some of the initiatives that we have accomplished this year and are working on, and the way we really do work for the students, and the way we have committed ourselves to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I just think that it was really important for us to understand, because obviously we're in the middle of this work and not committing a lot of time to it. And so it helped me stop and think how we can do a better job of communicating that to students.
Perfect. And Caleb, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Hunter pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think she's been fantastic at making sure that everybody is included. Not only is included, has a seat at the table, but once you're there, she really focuses in on letting people who haven't always had a voice on campus spearhead projects and make sure that, you know, they're representing for their community, and we're building a better Texas Tech campus for all students. And so, yeah, she hit the nail on the head, and I'm just excited to work under her.
Perfect. Okay, for students that don't know about SGA, can you please explain, Hunter, about the role of the president within the association?
Yeah, so funny story. Last week I did an interview with another reporter, and it's supposed to be like a 5 or 10 minute call just talking about what SGA does. I spent 58 minutes just explaining what SGA is and what we do. But I'll try to keep this short. So within my role, there's several things. One, I'm generally the primary liaison between the student body and administration. So on any given week, I probably have 10 to 15 meetings with various members of administration where I sit on committees as the student voice, or take our initiatives that the Student Senate has passed to administration. So that's one of the primary roles that I play. Additionally, I'm responsible for overseeing the budget of Student Government Association. So we allocate about $500,000 to student organizations each year. So I oversee that, make approvals for student organization funds, etc. And then also I have my own initiatives that can be separate from the Student Senate, which I always try to collaborate with them on to get pieces passed in support of that. But we have our executive initiatives as well that I particularly work on and work with my vice presidents on. And then my chief of staff, Riley, oversees our cabinet, which consists of 14 members within respective topics or issues. So we've got, like, Caleb is our director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we've also got, like, a director of sustainability, among other things. And so it really is overseeing all of the executive branch, because if I were to try to do everything, it would not happen, and I would not do it perfectly. And so it's helping make sure that all of our members within the branch are empowered to do their role as best as they can, but then also taking issues to admin and communicating and conveying those properly and appropriately.
Perfect. And then Caleb, can you tell about, like, what you do as director of?
So as Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for SGA, my main goal is to make sure that, like we've already said, that everyone is included, that students of all backgrounds, identities, they have what they need on campus. They feel like they belong on campus. And so that really comes through, like Hunter said, creating initiatives that are meeting some of the needs that students have asked for. One of the things that we're working on now is creating a cultural education resource list. That's been really big. I know this summer one of the largest social justice movements we've ever seen for our generation happen. And so I think that this definitely came out of that. And so when you're coming to Texas Tech with 50,000 some students, you want to feel like you're not just a number. You want to feel like there's a sense of community here. And so I think that by implementing this cultural education resource list, we can start to educate one another. And not only can you find people who look like you, share the same experiences, you also know that even if you're around people who don't share that same background, they understand you a little bit better. So yeah, that's one of the things that we're doing. And then Hunter, we work with Hunter a lot to do some restorative justice measures as well. We know that everything hasn't always been equal or fair, not just within SGA, but Texas Tech as a whole, and that's just a fact of history. And so we're working on a lot of initiatives now that are going to make it easier for some orgs to get funding, you know what I mean? Make it easier for students to just have the necessities that they need so that they can focus on their academics while they're here.
Yeah.
So.
And I'll say Caleb's been doing the work for so much longer than even his tenure in SGA, and that's why I felt that it was so crucial for him to be a part of the table within our organization, because I don't know how much listeners know about Caleb, but he's been one of the most prominent voices here at Texas Tech since the beginning of his time here, calling and insisting upon shared governance and upon equity and upon justice for our marginalized communities. And so I just want to say that he's just always been killing it, and I'm inspired by him and could not be more grateful to have him in student government.
Perfect. Okay, reaching back onto the program that you're talking about, would that be directly implemented through student organizations on campus, or would that be mandated for all students on campus?
So it'll actually, when we're complete with it, it'll be on our SGA website, so that when students go on there, they can look at videos. Where we actually created a whole YouTube playlist that start to get conversations rolling about things that affect marginalized communities in the U.S. And so it's meant to be a conversation starter. Me and our other director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, Nicholas Hines, we wanted to make sure that we weren't speaking for anyone. And so we reached out to all the orgs that we we know represent a large demographic here. And so we want to reach out to them so that they could send us resources that specifically have to do with their identities. But on our end, like, we know that there's problems at the U.S. border. We know that systemic racism exists in the U.S. We know that, these lands were belonging to indigenous and Native American peoples first. And so we can submit resources like we have now to get that conversation rolling. And then once those organizations submit their own resources, like books, podcasts, anything they feel would be a good educational resource, then we'll put that on the website as well. So that's kind of like the meat of it.
Yeah, and we've got several other initiatives that we've got going on. I don't know if you want us to discuss that now.
No, yes,
okay.
Please.
Yeah, so on top of what he's discussing with those educational resources, so the official training that Texas Tech University mandates for first year and transfer students includes identity and inclusion trainings, mental health, consent and sexual assault training, among various other topics. And we're actually working with RISE right now to expand that to all students. And so now, instead of just the first year students receiving these trainings, they're going to receive them every single year of their education. And each year the training has about 75% new material, because we felt that was really important, because I mean, I know it can be hard to remember something that we learned 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So that's one of the key things that comes from an institutional standpoint. Caleb also mentioned the restorative justice stuff. So we've been working with the Dean of Students, and for listeners that don't know, restorative justice is a form of conflict resolution that focuses on healing and restoration rather than punishment. So it can be a really great resource for students in, say, cases of hate speech, or can even be applied to Title IX incidents. And it's not an end-all be-all, and it's very specific for particular cases, but studies have shown that it provides healing for those who have been on the receiving end of an incident, and provides education for the one perpetuating the harm. So we're really excited about that. We're getting staff trained. We've already picked out who's going to be doing the training. And we're also considering getting some students trained in it as well, and hopefully rolling that out over the summer and the fall, which I'll be gone by then, but it will happen. And then some other things, I know Caleb mentioned, this land was first resided upon by indigenous people groups. And so this year, the Senate mandated that at the beginning of each Senate meeting and our Student Government Association meetings, we do a land acknowledgement. One of the big things that I know we ran on last year, our campaign took together, was the budget and finance reform.
Yes.
And so what we did this year is, so there's core value funding now within student affairs, and student government oversees it. And the core values fund exists for student organizations. They can apply to it, and this is separate from normal SGA funding. And what it does is, if the organization's missions and events, etc., align with the core values of Student Government Association and the university, for example, accountability, diversity and inclusion, community service, they're able to receive these funds. But the way SGA incorporated that into the budget and finance process was that in future years, student organizations that utilize these funds can actually apply those as what was, quote, allocated the year before, because the hope is that for newer student organizations or student organizations who represent like minoritized identities that haven't been at Texas Tech as long as those who haven't, and therefore haven't been able to build up the history of funding in the same way, are able to build their funding at an expedited pace. And so that was very crucial. And our BNF chair, Neil, changed a lot of how we actually go about interviewing student organizations. Those are a couple. I've got several more things, but I don't want to talk the whole time here. Do you want to talk more about like the Halloween letter, and then the letter we sent last summer pertaining to, and even the George Floyd Memorial Scholarship, some of those things?
Yeah, so like I said, Hunter has been really good about letting us come and bring our concerns and be transparent and address situations that have affected us. I know that the letter concerning the George Floyd Memorial Scholarships, we wanted to put a letter out in support of our Black Student Association, because we know that while, in my opinion, it shouldn't be, the situation is very controversial. And so as Black students on Tech campus, especially after an incident like that happened, you can see why we would want to name a scholarship after George Floyd. And so it was very apparent to SGA, especially our other director of diversity, Nicholas Hines, that SGA should be behind it. If we're supporting all students, we need to make sure that BSA knows that we're 100% behind them. And so we crafted that letter to make sure that, our intentions were clear, as well as soliciting support from other students, because the scholarships need funding. And then like our Halloween letter that Hunter crafted, and then a few of us helped on, there's been a history of Texas Tech of cultural appropriation. And so we could go down a list, but it's very important that going forward, like we're talking about that sense of community and environment where, you feel like you belong and your identity isn't being made a mockery of. And so I love that Hunter, I think this is the first time that a letter like that came out, because I don't remember, to my recollection, I don't remember being on campus in the past years and having a letter like that. And so I think that sent a really good message on behalf of SGA to show that, like, we don't just say it when there's a town hall meeting, or we don't just say it after an incident happens and then now we all have to come together and play, like, hurry up and save, it's proactive. And I think that's the biggest thing that I loved about working with SGA this year. Hunter and everyone else, the whole team has been so proactive, I think, in making sure that we set the tone in the beginning before something happens. And I think that's what those letters speak to. So
perfect. Of course, COVID being a big issue this year, has COVID affected any of these programs or initiatives that you started in any way?
I mean, for some of the initiatives, they really relied on either the ability to gather or businesses being opened, such as, we discussed this earlier, like the Safe Bar initiative. We wanted to kick that off over the summer and early fall, but most bars were shut down.
Yes.
So for some of our initiatives, we literally couldn't get started until those businesses began opening back up. And then other initiatives, like, say, A lot of, like, we're planning right now the Diversity Week event that'll happen
Yes.
later this semester, or our MLK Week that was back in January. Several of these events generally rely on an ability for a lot of people to gather, but we wanted to be as good stewards of our students' health and safety as possible, and so a lot of our programming has shifted to online, mostly because of COVID, and wanted it to be approachable and students to feel safe to be there. And honestly, I found that, like, in future years, like, I think a strong recommendation will be to continue to allow all events to be hybrid, because sometimes it can be intimidating for a student to show up in a particular space, such as a town hall meeting where they haven't spoken with their representatives before, and so it can be a lot easier to show up on a Zoom call with your camera off and just listen, rather than having to actually show up and be there in person. So I think we've learned some really good lessons out of it as well. And then on top of that, I mean, one of the other key initiatives this year has been getting menstrual products, free menstrual product dispensers in the restrooms across campus, and specifically in gender-inclusive single occupancy bathrooms, because that's another DEI issue, which, coming to the university administration with ideas that are going to require a lot of costs for the university whenever COVID has taken away millions of dollars from our institutions. These can be really difficult conversations because the university recognizes the importance of them, but at the same time, we're very, very limited financially.
Yes.
So I'd say there's been some pros and lessons that we've learned about it, but then there's also been some very significant barriers in getting things accomplished.
Perfect. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just think that COVID has definitely brought a ton of things to light, and even though we're limited in some capacity, I think it's shown a light on all the growth that we've made and all the growth that we still have to make. And so, like Hunter was saying, like, I just think before COVID, I think a lot of us like, oh, we need to do this, or this would be a good idea to implement so we could say it in the name of diversity, equity, inclusion, right? But I think COVID happening, just like with I keep going back to it, but just like the movements this summer, I don't think it would have been that big if COVID didn't happen. We had a lot of, like, serious conversations right when COVID hit at the end of Hunter's campaign. And so even though it may have stopped physical, like, mobilization and modality, I think that it inspired a lot of us on her cabinet to be like, okay, we can't let the momentum stop. And so I think after this year, all of the initiatives that I'm seeing, like, a Black Cultural Center is in the works. You know what I mean? Like, that's great, which I want to say it would have happened regardless of COVID, but I'm not going to say that COVID didn't play an instrumental part in making sure, okay, now there's no excuse. You know what I mean? Like, we have the time. You know, we may not have the funds, but we can lay the foundation. And when I talk to a lot of student orgs like Silk and, of course, BSA, they're talking about that too, about, okay, it's given us the time to address some concerns that have been, like, long lasting. So,
What stage is that cultural center at right now?
So Dr. Sumner has formulated a committee, and she's reached out to a lot of undergrad students, and I want to say grad students as well, some faculty and staff. And so right now, I know that they have a floor plan set, so it's definitely in the works. Obviously, it's in the beginning stages.
Yes.
The demand for the cultural center came out in, I want to say around March, like February. That's when we had a town hall with BSA and stuff. So it's still pretty early in the game. I know that they're renovating an existing building on campus for it, but it's something that has been so needed. And hopefully this will also start to spark the conversation of other cultural centers on campus, or just spaces in general for other identities, not just BSA.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. We had a virtual tour of some Black cultural centers at other institutions over the past couple of weeks, and so they've been gathering a lot of ideas for it and getting some inspiration from other universities. And like Caleb said, this is the first step, but then also seeking ways that we can include these centers for other groups on our campus as well.
Perfect. I know over the summer that the School of Theater and the VPA came out with a letter from some of the alumni and students and faculty and staff saying that they wanted changes within the school. Did y'all address them in any way?
So following that letter and a lot of the demands across all of the university, we really wanted to make it a goal, like Caleb said, not just to be reactive to these things, but proactive as well. And so one of the first things we sought to do was to express the view of Student Government Association regarding the movement, but also be proactive in understanding how can we educate our students, how can we actually create the change and not come off as performative, because performative activism is a very real issue that has been at Texas Tech in the past, and that is important to check ourselves on, for those, like for myself being a privileged individual, check myself on all the time. And so what we did over the summer also, pertaining to that, we had discussions with administration about what they're doing and how they're addressing the situation. And then on top of that, we actually drafted a letter that we sent out to all student organizations, which was over 500 groups, about anti-racism practices, in how they can go about recruitment, avoiding microaggressions, getting them trained. I know that a new requirement now to be a registered student organization within Student Life is to have the leadership and potentially membership. I can't remember if they've expanded it yet or not. That they be trained in inclusive practices, and so a lot of the work pertained to how we can go about educating our students and getting them the resources that they need in order to empower everyone to be part of the change, and not just post a blanket statement on social media, because that's been done every year in SGA.
Yes.
If you go through the Instagram history, there's a statement probably every year, and that's why so many of our Black students and our minoritized student groups don't trust SGA. And I will be the first to say, like, I get why people don't trust student government, because the reality is that student government hasn't always been a place where everyone's had a seat at the table. And no, we cannot change the past, but we can continue to work for a better future. And unfortunately, change can be slow, especially across 40,000 students. But that's something we've sought to commit ourselves to by meeting our words with action.
Perfect. And would you like to add anything? No? Okay. Okay.
So I'm sorry if I'm talking too much.
No, y'all are good.
I'm a rambler here.
Okay, and earlier you mentioned that y'all are in the works of doing Diversity Week, which is slated for later in the semester. Can you give us some details about that?
Yeah, so do you want to go? I think you can. You want to talk about it? No, you don't have to. Charles is the main point of contact for planning Diversity Week. But one of the things that we're super excited about, what we wanted to do was do this during Wellness Week, the first one that we had in February, but because of the winter storms, we weren't able to get it coordinated in time. One of the things that student government is doing is we're going to feature student musicians across campus during Diversity Week to help just display more of, not just like more diversity in the cultures and what music means to our various student groups. And so I'm really excited about that. Among other things, there's going to be some events similar to kind of what MLK Week looked like, but there will be more details to come. But that's like late March, early April. When you interview Charles, he can probably talk to you about more. But in addition, I'm super excited about this. This month is also Women's History Month. And so I'm Dr. Long, who's the interim dean of the Honors College, is one of my absolute favorite humans. She's a rock star. So I'm working on getting her, hopefully Dr. Sumner, Jody Randall, and just lots of women in leadership across campus, a diverse group of women. So I want to make sure every single part of what it means to be a woman is represented within this. We're going to do some form of basically like not a conference, but a series or an event where we just get to hear from them and hear what it's been like for them as women in higher education. I'm hoping also to include some various leaders across campus, like Priscilla Colmenero is president of the Hispanic Student Society, and she's an SGA also, and so I'd love to see her be part of the event. But so we're coordinating something for Women's History Month as well. And then another important point is like Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month is in May. My term ends May 1st, but we'll know the results of the upcoming election in just a couple of weeks. So what I want to do is, as we begin that transition period, work with the new executive team to plan events for that month as well. So there's several things coming up to celebrate, but on the Diversity Week specifically, Charles will probably be able to answer more for you.
Okay, perfect. I guess before we talk about upcoming elections for SGA, I guess we have to address the elephant in the room, which is COVID-19 and the mask mandate that the governor decided to lift. We would like to know the opinions of the SGA president and the diversity and equity director.
Where do you even begin? I think that our main priority always is to make sure that we're safe. And I know personally, I wasn't even on campus last semester due to COVID. And so I know that there's many other students who, are coming onto campus. We have freshmen and transfer students here that are probably like in such a culture shock, not only because they're in Lubbock, but COVID is a thing. You know what I mean? And that goes back to our families back at home too. Like, they're worrying about us. We're in a college town, 5 hours, some of us 5, 6, 10 hours out of state, wherever you're coming from, right? And so just to reiterate, like, that's our number one priority as SGA. And so I know SGA called a Senate meeting yesterday to talk about things. And so, how do I say this? Like, it's good to see that no matter what is happening at the top, we as students care enough for one another to be able to have the conversation of, yes, Greg Abbott implemented this mask or repealed the mask mandate, right? But we want to keep each other safe. And so SGA has always been a big part of that. We've already endorsed vaccines, you know what I mean? Like, we want to make sure that tech is a safe place, period. So
I got my vaccine Wednesday. So
yes.
Perfect.
I can't lift my arm above right here. Yeah. I mean, if anyone listened to the Senate meeting yesterday or has paid any attention to my social media at all, I think my views on this are pretty clear. But I'll address specifically why I have the views that I have. I think, first of all, science shows that masks work, and it's very clear that we are not out of this pandemic. In fact, we have more dangerous strands in the United States right now that is projected to be more prevalent than the original COVID-19 strand. And so, I mean, I think Mohammed, one of our senators last night, talked about how we've almost got the house fire out. Are we just going to draw away now and allow it to basically light back up, right? And then second of all, and this is something that I discussed last night as well, it's an equity issue for our students who have to work part-time or full-time jobs outside of class. If they catch COVID-19, they can be out of work for 2 weeks. That means missing groceries. That means missing rent payment. And then in addition to that, the CDC research shows that the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities. And if we were to sit here and say that we're about equity and we're about inclusion, then we have to include the voices of our students who are also working part-time jobs, who are from these marginalized communities at the table, because when your argument is primarily, I want to do what I want, some people don't get to just do what they want and it still end up the same. Like, some people can catch COVID and sit at home and it's no big deal for 10 days, whereas for some students, that can be the difference between rent and not meeting rent for the month. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, our number one priority as students, coming to tech, is to graduate. It's to do well academically. And so, just for reiterating what Hunter said, if you have COVID, you can't be in class. You can't get that instruction that you're needing. And then also, if you're looking at the long-term effects of COVID, which still need to be studied, but we know that people who have had COVID have problems focusing after they get over the illness. So it's not just getting COVID, it's the fallout after it. And so I just think that the mask mandate not being there is reckless. You know what I mean? I just got through going to funerals of family members who passed away from COVID. You know what I mean? And so just like Hunter was saying, you think it doesn't affect you on whatever level if you get COVID, or even if you don't, you think you're invincible to it until it happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so it's like she said, it's not the COVID stats are not even below what they were in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even think that, in my opinion, that we ever got over a first wave. So you know what I mean? It's just not the right time. And if SGA is here for our students,
mm-hmm.
and we want our student, the number one priority for students is to graduate, then we have to make sure that we're doing things like wearing a mask so that, you know, the fallout from it is taken care
mm-hmm.
of.
I think also there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think one, people our age aren't invincible.
Mm-hmm.
There are people our age dying.
Yes.
There are students at this university who have been hospitalized with COVID-19.
With no underlying condition.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
We are not above this, and so I think that's one bit of misinformation that needs to be addressed. And then two, and more importantly, a lot of people are under the understanding that masks protect the individual wearing the mask, but if you look again at the science
mm-hmm.
from CDC, it shows that masks are actually intended to protect the people around the person wearing the mask.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say, I want the choice of protecting myself against the virus or not, technically, if the vaccine isn't available, you don't have that choice.
Mm-hmm.
You're dependent upon the people around you to wear your mask, and until all of our students have the opportunity to get vaccinated and better protect themselves against the virus, they are literally dependent upon other people to protect them if they want to be able to have any human interaction. And because of that, we can't be at a place where we choose to protect ourselves or not, because technically right now, unless students have access to the vaccine, they're dependent upon others
mm-hmm.
to protect them. And I think that's a really key part of the conversation that's necessary. And for some reason, a lot of people still don't understand. So that's one of the ways we're also trying to work on improving the messaging around why masks are important. Because it really is like a harm principle issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, here's my philosophy nerdiness coming out. It's not a paternalism issue. Like, it's a harm principle
mm-hmm.
issue. So you doing that is protecting others or harming others, not just yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, it's a good soapbox to be on. Like, it's just riding on the principle of you. The whole pandemic is riding on the principle of you caring about
mm-hmm.
others, and that's hard. Clearly, it's been very hard for
mm-hmm.
the United States to do. So it's a good soapbox to be on.
Perfect.
And I'll say, I understand people are tired
mm-hmm.
of wearing masks. I will be the first to say, I hate wearing masks.
Mm-hmm.
I do. But cost-benefit analysis, life, safety, others is way more important than the uncomfortable feeling
mm-hmm.
of putting on a mask. And I know one of the senators mentioned it last night. You know, we're all doing, or most of us are doing the very best we can. And in some
mm-hmm.
cases, you know, we've messed up on guidelines.
Yes.
We can find ways to do better. But as a whole, if we can make this commitment and to continue to do the best we can to see it out and carry it out and see it through. I mixed up my words
mm-hmm.
though. That's what's in the interest of our student body.
Perfect. And I guess the last topic before we sign off is, of course, the upcoming town hall, which is
Yes.
what day?
Next Thursday
Okay.
at 8 o'clock p.m. So I guess that's March 11th.
Okay, March 11th, yes. And then is it going to be in virtual, Zoom?
It's going to be over Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I have another announcement.
Yes.
March 10th is the executive forum
mm-hmm.
for the 2021 SGA elections. So we're about to post a sheet or a form where people can submit questions for the candidates. But that is, so they're basically, the actual forum will be in person, but it's literally just going to be the candidates and the panel, and then
mm-hmm.
the rest is going to be live streamed. So it'll be hybrid.
Okay, perfect. Do you have anything else to add before we sign off?
I think people are tired
Okay.
hearing my voice.
I'll just say that I've been at Tech for 5 years now.
mm-hmm.
And like Hunter was saying, this is my first year being involved with SGA.
Mm-hmm.
And beforehand, I don't think that my relationship with SGA has been the greatest if you look at my track record. Just because, and I wouldn't say it was malicious or like I had ill will towards SGA. I just feel like some of the experiences that I had coming in as a freshman kind of deterred me away from getting involved. And then when we did like the whole Strive for Who campaign, we called out a lot of, not just SGA, but a lot of organizations and just different facets at Texas Tech. And so coming in, when Hunter originally asked me, like, do you want to be like my director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I was nervous, one, because I had no SGA experience. So I was like, what? I don't even know if I'm going to be good at the job because I didn't know. But I say all that to say there's just been so much progress that has been made. And so I just want students to know that, like, if anyone understands about not feeling like there's been transparency or not feeling like Tech is doing enough, I promise you could probably search up a interview that was on the news of me talking about Texas Tech needs to be better. Like, I've always been that person that's like, this could be better, this could be better, we need to be, you know what I mean? But I can honestly say, after working with Hunter, I'm so happy to, like, see the direction that our SGA is going in, and Tech as a whole. There's been so much change that there is now than when I was a freshman 5 years ago. And so I just want them to know, especially I know whoever will take Hunter's place will continue on, but while we're still here in these positions, to just welcome them and be like, any concern, literally, I feel like we have some of the best people who have been where you are, who feel like, no, there's more to be done. So yeah, just we're here for anything.
Yeah, I think my final note is, I think on the transparency note, one of the key things we noticed is, like, we're getting stuff done, and we're working tirelessly to implement them, but there is a disconnect between the student body seeing what we're doing, and I'll be the first to admit, like, we can do a lot better, like, on my end, about communicating what we're doing. And so some of the key, like, action steps we're taking that we either had in place before or since the last podcast was published was we've been working on updating the website for a really long time, hoping to include a specific initiatives tab where people can see, like, if something's in progress, if it's completed, or if it hasn't yet started. Providing some transparency there, looking at maybe even, like, a Reddit type page where students can start threads about particular conversations, and among other things, including improving communication about budget and finance. That is, I could spend an hour talking about that and still not articulate it. And then on top of that, we started a new live stream series on our social medias where after every Senate meeting, we have senators just talk about how the meeting went, what was passed, etc. But always looking to refine the way we communicate with the students, because ultimately, if the students don't know how and what we do, then they're not going to feel comfortable coming to us with those concerns. And so I'll say that we seek to continue to improve, and with voices from students communicating that to us, we can always improve in that regard. And so I appreciate the podcast, and I appreciate all that have reached out, and, like, truly do want to communicate that we're working hard for our students and doing the best we possibly can to work towards a better Texas Tech. And we're just really grateful for the students that we represent and the many voices that are included in that body. So yeah, I think that's it. And I will finally say, this will actually be the last thing I say. I'm so sorry. This has been the most meaningful year of my life. Mateo and I were talking before the podcast about how last week I almost cried in front of the Board of Regents. Talking about this, just saying how meaningful this position has been and how grateful I am for the students. And we couldn't have been in these positions if it weren't for the students placing their faith in us. And so we literally wouldn't have a job unless students didn't have concerns or didn't have needs that needed to be met. And so I just want to say thank you to all the students that have allowed us to serve them in this capacity.
Perfect. I know that's a lot we've talked about, but of course, if I haven't said this already, this is a special collaboration between the Opinions section and Hunter Hex and her administration on trying to lift that veil between the student population and SGA. So we hope that through these podcasts, the student populations will become more informed and more interactive with the administration. Even though it's in the last few weeks and elections are up, there's a lot that Hunter has done, and also all her executive officers and her cabinet have done. And we want to bring that to you. So next time, hopefully, I'll be joined again with Hunter and Sequoia Perry, who is the Political Affairs Director.
Director of Political
Yes.
Affairs.
We're talking about what is going on in the Texas legislation and how it's going to affect tech and what is going on. Also, we'll continue talking about transparency in the later podcast, and then we'll see where this goes. But that is all the time we have today, Red Raiders. Be sure to pick up your copy of the Daily Toreador this coming Thursday, and keep up to date with all things tech on our website, dailytoreador.com. And also be sure to interact with us on our Twitters. You are listening to the Political Dive. Thank you. You're listening to a production of the Matador Beat.